Thank you for being with me, Jon Stewart.
My absolute pleasure. Welcome back. Very excited to see you back on the television.
I'm glad to be here, but I'm here only because I applied for a job as a correspondent on The Daily Show, and you see, I've turned me down.
We have standards. Anybody with the kind of journalism experience and professionalism that you have displayed over these years cannot work for my program.
You've said many times, I don't want to be a journalist. I'm not a journalist.
And we're not.
But you're acting like one. You've assumed that role. The young people who work with me now think they get better journalism from you than they do from the Sunday morning talk show.
I can assure them they're not getting any journalism from us. We are, if anything, I do believe we function as a sort of editorial cartoon. That we are a digestive process, like so many other digestive processes that go on. The thing about, there's a lot of talk of young people get this from you, young people get that from you. People are very sophisticated consumers of information, and they're pulling all different things. It's the same argument that people say about the blogs. The blogs are irresponsible. No, they're not. The blogs are like anything else. You judge each one based on its own veracity and intelligence and all that. And if you'd like, you could cherry pick only the things that you agree with from various things. Or if you want, you can try and get a broader perspective, or you can find people who are absolutely out of their minds, or find people that are doing incredibly complex and interesting and urgent journalism. And the same goes for our show. It's a prism into usually people's own ideologies when they watch our program. This is just our take.
But it is interesting. Sometimes you'll start a riff, or you'll start down the path of a joke, and it's about Bush or about Cheney, and the audience will get it. Your live audience will get it. They'll start applauding, even before they know the punchline. And I'm thinking, okay, they get it. That's half the country. What about the other half of the country? Are they paying attention? They don't care. They wouldn't listen to the joke. If they did, they wouldn't get it.
Well, I do think that sense of humor goes as far as your ideology. I think that ultimately we have very interesting reactions on our show. People are constantly saying, I love your show is so funny, until you made a joke about global warming, which is a serious issue, and I can't believe you did that, and I'm never watching your show again. People don't understand that we're not warriors in their cause. We're a group of people that really feel that they want to write jokes about the absurdity that we see in government and the world and all that, and that's it.
Bush had come mainly to discuss the war spending bill, recently passed by the Democratic Congress, which gives the president all the funding he desired for the troop surge, but ties the funding to a definite date for withdrawal of the troops. And you won't believe what the president thinks of that idea.
Pushing legislation that would undercut our troops, just as we're beginning to make progress in Baghdad.
Oh, we're just beginning to make progress. No! They just pulled the rug. No, it's just happening now. I seem to remember we've been making progress for quite some time now.
That's progress. And it's important progress. And it's an important part of our strategy to win in Iraq. Iraq has made incredible political progress. Iraqis are making inspiring progress. Iraq has made incredible political progress. I believe we're making really good progress in Iraq. We're making progress. We're making steady progress. We're making progress. It's slowly but surely making progress. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
Wait a minute! I figured this out! I know what's wrong with what we've done in Iraq. We've been following time as it goes forward. What a classic mistake. Linear time is so pre-9/11.
It's kind of astonishing. There is... I used to have a real disconnect, I think, with the administration. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I think it's suddenly become clear to me. They would rather us believe them to be wildly incompetent and inarticulate than to let us know anything about how they operate. And so they do constitutionally mandated things most of the time, but they fulfill the letter of their obligation to checks and balances, but not the intent. For instance, Alberto Gonzalez, and you've been watching the hearings, he is either a perjurer or a low-functioning pinhead. And he allowed himself to be portrayed in those hearings as a low-functioning pinhead rather than give the congressional committee charged with oversight any information as to his decision-making process at the Department of Justice. And I used to think, they're doing this based on a certain arrogance. And now I realize that it's because they believe there is one accountability moment for a president, and that is the 4-year election. And once you get that election, you're done.
They're right, are they not?
They're completely not right. The election moment is merely the American public saying, we'd rather you be president than that guy. That's it. The next 4 years, though, you still have to abide by the oversight process that is there to prevent this kind of bizarre sort of cult-like atmosphere that falls along. I mean, I accept that kind of veil of secrecy around Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes, but I don't accept that around our government.
Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of words were written about Gonzalez's testimony last week in Congress. And I still don't think a lot of people get it. And all of a sudden there on The Daily Show that evening, you distilled the essence of it.
So there it was today, the big fight, Gonzalez v. Senate. Are you ready to bumble?
Whose idea was this?
Senator, I don't recall specifically. I don't recall the content. Senator, I have no recollection. I don't have any recollection. I have searched my memory. I don't recall remembering. I can only testify as to what I recall. Senator, I don't recall. I firmly believe that nothing improper occurred.
After weeks of mock testimony, there you have it. Alberto Gonzalez doesn't know what happened, but he assures you what he doesn't remember was handled properly.
And by the way, that was all that was a game, and he knew it, and the guys on the committee knew it, and for the president to come out after that and say, everything I saw there gave me more confidence in him, that solidified my notion that, it's because what he expected of Gonzalez was, it's sort of like, you remember in Goodfellas when Henry Hill got arrested for the first time, and Robert De Niro met him at the courthouse, and Henry Hill was really upset because he thought Robert De Niro would be really mad at him. And De Niro comes up to him and he gives him $100, and he goes, "You got pinched. We all get pinched, but you did it right. You didn't say nothing."
Gonzalez said nothing.
Right. And you went up there and said nothing. You gave them no legal recourse against you, and you made yourself, a smart man, a self-made man, look like an utter pinhead on national television, and you did it for me.
How do you explain that the Washington press corps, by and large, particularly the Sunday shows, join the game with them? I mean, you watch those shows.
They don't all. I mean,
no, not all of them do, but there's a kind of wink questioning going on there. You know, I'll ask the devil's advocate.
Because it's the Harlem Globetrotters playing the Washington Generals. They're the only teams playing, and they know they got to play each other every week, and they all sort of have assumed their role. And I mean, at this point, the government is just, blowing the doors off the media, and not everywhere. And I think this is where, a lot of those blog reporters and all those things are bringing a lot of urgency and a lot of momentum to stories that wouldn't normally carry any momentum.
We watched the McCain interview you did this week. Mm-hmm. Something was going on in that interview that I have not seen in any other interview you've done with a political figure. What was going on in your head?
In my head?
Yeah.
Are his arms long enough to connect with me if he comes across the table?
The American people, or at least the ones that I get on the subway with, they know there's a real threat out there. They felt like Iraq lessened our ability to fight that threat. So when they say that, when they say the talking point of they'll follow us home, they're trying to follow us home anyway, whether we're in Iraq or not.
I know that. And look, Bill Russell, a famous philosopher of the Boston Celtics, once said, when things go bad, things go bad. The war was terribly mismanaged.
But then let them be honest with us. Why attack people that question that?
We are where we are now. We are where we are now. And then the question is, can we give this strategy a chance? And I'm emphasizing a chance to succeed with a great general.
Why?
And I think we have, because
if
the consequences of failure are enormous.
If the architects that built a house without any doors or windows don't admit that that's the house they built and continue to say, no, it's your fault for not being able to see into it, then I don't understand how we're supposed to move forward.
I don't particularly enjoy those types of interviews because I have great respect for Senator McCain, and I hate the idea that our conversation became just two people sort of talking over each other at one point. But I also, in my head, thought I would love to do an interview where it's just sort of deconstructed the talking points of Iraq, sort of the idea of, is this really the conversation we're having about this war, that if we don't defeat al-Qaeda in Iraq, they'll follow us home, that to support the troops means not to question that the surge could work, that what we're really seeing in Iraq is not a terrible war, but in fact just the media's portrayal of it. So I wanted to just go through, like, is this really the conversation that we're going to be having about something as significant as this war?
They say that asking for a timetable or criticizing the president is not supporting the troops. Explain to me why that is supporting the troops less than extending their tours of duty from 12 months to 15 months, putting them in stop-loss, and not having Walter Reed be up to snuff. How is it, how can the president justify that? How can he have the balls to justify that?
All I can say is that if you talk to these young men and women who are fighting, they'll tell you they think it's a worthwhile cause and that they're fighting for freedom. And they, you know,
Not all of them.
All I'm saying, the overwhelming majority of them do. I hear from them all the time.
The majority of guys that I talk to say, the political scene is not my scene, I'm a soldier.
I talk to them all the time, my friend, and I hear from them all the time. They know. I know what war is like. I know what evil is like.
You're saying to me that they're
and I'm telling you that they believe that they are fighting for somebody else's freedom, and the majority of them believe that.
I don't doubt
you're
that.
entitled to your views.
But no, that's
the
a
view
different
of the
point.
majority of them is that they think they are doing the
soldier's
right
view is
thing,
a different
and their
point.
parents, who have also had them sacrificed, generally speaking, are proud of the service of their sons and daughters.
No one's saying
as well as
that
their
they shouldn't be
husbands and
proud of
wives.
their service.
And I'm
not
proud
the
of them
thing.
too, because they're the best.
This is a very unfair way to deal with this.
It certainly is.
Issue because
it certainly is.
Let me explain
it's
it this way.
Very unfair.
What I'm saying
to
is,
treat
what's
it.
less
when
supportive
these
of them.
People are being told they're fighting
Settle
a
down
war.
for a second.
No, you settle down.
What's
that they're
less
fighting in a
supportive?
war that they lost. That's not fair to them.
What I believe is less supportive to the good people who believe they're fighting a great cause is to not give them a strategy that makes their success possible.
We now have a strategy.
To not,
Yes, we
adding
do.
10,000 people to quell
We
Baghdad.
now have a strategy.
Add 350,000 and you
I
might have a
promise
shot.
you, I don't know that strategy will succeed, but we do have a new strategy. It's a fact.
All I'm saying is you cannot look a soldier in the eye and say questioning the president is less supportive to you than extending your tour 3 months when you should be coming home to your family.
Every American.
I saw McCain shrivel. I mean, he's been on your show.
He didn't believe me. I think anybody who's been in a POW camp for 5 years can take 8 minutes on The Daily Show.
But something happened. You saw it happen to him.
What you saw was evasive action. It wasn't shriveling. It was merely...
But he dropped his head, and you could actually see.
He stopped connecting and just looked at my chest and decided, I'm just going to continue to talk about honor and duty, and the families should be proud, and all the things that are cudgels emotionally to keep us from the conversation, but things that weren't relevant to what we were talking about.
So many people seem to want just what you did. Somebody to cut through the talking points and get our politicians to talk candidly and frankly. I mean, I know you have
Not that many people. You've seen our ratings. Some people want it. A couple of people downloaded from iTunes.
But it was this time, this moment, this week that you decided and coming back to him.
Well, it's also at the fore now because the Senate and the House are working on timetables, which, by the way, who knows if that's an issue either. But it's, again, the conversation that the Senate and the House are having with the president was very similar to the conversation that McCain and I were having, which was two people talking over each other and nobody really addressing the underlying issues of what kind of country do we want to be moving forward in this? And it's not about being a pacifist or suggesting that you can never have a military solution to things. It's just that it appears that this is not the smart way to fight this threat.
Your persistence and his inability to answer without the talking points did get to the truth, that there's a contradiction in what's going on in Vietnam. There's a contradiction. Exactly. There's a contradiction in what's going on in that war that they can't talk about.
That's right. There's an enormous contradiction, and it is readily apparent if you just walk through simple sort of logic. and simple, rational points. But the thing that they don't realize is that everyone wants them to come from beyond that contradiction so that we can all fix it. Nobody is saying we don't have a problem. Nobody is saying that 9/11 didn't happen. What they're saying is we're not a fragile country. Trust us to have this conversation so that we can do this in the right way, in a more effective way. So
why aren't we having that conversation? I mean, that's a very good point.
Why are we not?
Why is the country not having this conversation, the kind of conversation that requires the politicians who are responsible for the war to be specific to the concerns of the American people? I mean, they do come on and a kind of gauze goes up.
Because I don't think politics is any longer about a conversation with the country. It's about figuring out how to get to do what you want. The best way to sell the product that you want to put out there, but not necessarily for the product's own. You know, it's sort of like when a dishwashing soap, you know, and they want to make a big splash, and so they decide they have more lemon, as though people are going to be like, that has been the problem with my dishes, not enough lemon scent.
What is your thinking about why it is that as the war enters its 5th year, and the president has announced an extension of tours to 15 months, and they're going to call up the National Guard, and April was the bloodiest month so far since the war started, and there was one day in April that was the bloodiest day, that people seem to have no way to get the guys in Washington and Condoleezza Rice to listen to them, that there seems a detachment emotionally and politically in this country from what is happening.
It's very hard to feel the difficulties that the military goes through. It's very hard to feel the difficulties of military families unless you're in that environment. And sometimes you have to force yourself to try and put yourself in other people's sort of shoes and environment to get the sense of that. I think, you know, one of the things that I do think government counts on is that people are busy. And it's very difficult to mobilize a busy and relatively affluent country unless it's over really crucial, you know, foundational issues that come to sort of a tipping point.
War is a
but
foundation.
war that hasn't affected us here in the way that you would imagine a 5-year war would affect a country. I think that's why they're so really... Here's the disconnect. It's sort of this odd, and I've always had this problem with the rationality of it. The president says, we are in the fight for our way of life. This is the greatest battle of our generation and of the generations to come. And so what I'm going to do is, you know, Iraq has to be won or our way of life ends and our children and our children's children all suffer. So what I'm going to do is send 10,000 more troops to Baghdad. So there's a disconnect there between you're telling me this is the fight of our generation and you are going to increase troop strength by 10%. And that's going to do it. I'm sure what he would like to do is send 400,000 more troops there, but he can't because he doesn't have them. And the way to get that would be to institute a draft. And the minute you do that, suddenly the country's not so damn busy anymore. And then they really fight back, and then the whole thing falls apart. So they have a really delicate balance to walk between keeping us relatively fearful, but not so fearful that we stop what we're doing and really examine how it is that they've been waging this.
But I still need to know why McCain this week. Why you're exactly right.
Right.
But why is he the person from who?
He's the only person I can get a hold of. You mean, is that, why did
Yeah.
no one else will talk to me.
But you were thinking of these before you got McCain. I mean, you've been thinking.
Sure, yes. This happened with McCain because he was unfortunate enough to walk into the studio. You know, it's the frustration of our show is very much outside any parameters of the media or of the government. We don't have access to these people. We don't have access. We don't go to dinners. We don't have cocktail parties. We don't. You know, you've seen what happens when one of us ends up at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Doesn't end well. You know, so he was the unlucky recipient of pent-up frustration.
You know, the media have been playing this big. CNN, USA Today.
Well, they've got 24 hours.
Right.
So, you know, how many times can Anna Nicole Smith's baby get a new father?
But what does it say about the press that interview you did became news and in a way reflected on the failure of the, quote, professional journalists to ask those kind of questions?
I don't know if it reflects on the failure of them to ask that. I think, first of all, for some reason, everything that we do or Stephen does, Stephen Colbert, is also then turned into news. I think it's just about the machine is about reporting the news and then reporting the news about the news and then having those moments where they sit around and go, are we reporting the news correctly? I think we are. And then they go back to and the cycle just sort of continues. I don't know that if there was anything particularly astonishing about the conversation in that regard. You know, did you see the interview that Wolf Blitzer did with Dick Cheney a while back?
Joining us now, the Vice President of the United States, Dick Cheney. Kumbaya, my love. Kumbaya!
Give it one more chance. Now. It's not fair to judge. Perhaps this does signal a new era of openness, glasnost, if you will, with this administration and the American people.
Is bin Laden still alive? What if the Senate passes a resolution saying this is not a good idea? Have you contributed to his legal defense fund? You trust Nouri al-Maliki? You want him to arrest Muqtada al-Sadr?
Blitzer! Finally earning that white beard. Solid questions, Wolf. Mr. Vice President.
So I'm not going to discuss it. You can ask that question all day long. You've got my answer. I don't want to be that precise. Now no administration in their right mind is going to answer the question you just asked.
We know no administration in their right mind would answer it. We're asking you.
Have you lost your innocence?
What? Well, it was 1981. I was at a frat party. I'm sorry. You know, I think this is going to sound incredibly pat, but I think you lose your innocence when you have kids because the world suddenly becomes a much more dangerous place. And you become much more... there are two things that happen. You recognize how fragile individuals are, and you recognize the strength of the general overall group, but you don't care anymore. You're just fighting for that one thing. See, and then you also recognize that everybody then is also somebody's child. It's tumultuous.
So your children are how old?
2.5 and 14 months.
So has it been within that period of time that you made this, you wouldn't recognize it, but we recognize it, transformation from the stand-up comic to a serious social and political critic?
I don't consider myself a serious and social political critic. I consider myself...
But I do.
Well,
and I'm your audience.
Yes, and I end up with one of your tote bags. But the important thing is that I guess I don't spend any time thinking about what I am or what we do means. I spend my time doing it. And I think that's... I'm not trying to be modest or self-deprecating or in any way trying to do that.
Maybe you don't know why.
I'm just trying to tell you, I focus on the task and try and do it as best we can, and we're constantly evolving it because it's my way of trying to make sense of all these ambivalent feelings I have.
I watched the interview you did the other night with the former Iraqi official Ali Alawi, and I was struck that you were doing this soon after the massacre at Virginia Tech. Wasn't your usual daily show better?
A more personal note, and I don't even know if it's appropriate to broach it, but we in this country, we've just had a very tragic situation occur at one of our universities, and it really has taken the country aback, and there's a real grieving process that we're going through, and going through it mourning by learning about the victims and learning about it and showing our support. I hesitate to say, how does your country handle what is that type of carnage on a daily basis? Is there a way to grieve? Is there a numbness that sets in? How is that?
Well, I think the scale of violence in Iraq is really inconceivable in your terms. I mean, we have, on a daily basis, what you had the other day in Virginia Tech. I mean, massacres of that scale, practically on a daily basis. And it's very hard to grieve. Most of the ways that people do treat these is just to leave the country. And we now have a very large external refugee problem. Nearly 2 million Iraqis have left the country. And an internal refugee problem, also around 2 million people displaced. But the scale of violence and its continuity is such it really numbs you. And in my case, for example, I had 6 people whom I had appointed in various positions in the government killed, including my office manager. We had a suicide bomber walk into my contingent of guards. So it's quite a serious psychological problem, I think, that's going to be one of the legacies of this terrible crisis.
Yeah, and I truly cannot fathom it. And I just recall, there's been so much information, and as I was sort of becoming wrapped up in our grief and then I saw the headline today of literally 150 people killed, and I think it just it sends an awful dagger through your heart, and I can't imagine how they deal with it.
I mean, I said something's going on with Stewart there. What was it?
Well, first of all, there's the process that we put the show together is always going to be affected by the climate that we live in, and there was a pall cast over the country, but also you're fighting your own sadness during the day, having nothing to do with that. We feel no obligation to follow the news cycle. In other words, I felt no obligation to cover this story in any way because we're not, like I say, we're not journalists, and at that point there's nothing sort of funny or absurd or to say about it. But there is a sadness that you can't escape just within yourself. And I'm also interviewing a guy who's just written a book about his experience living in Iraq, faced with the type of violence that we're talking about on as he said, an unimaginable scale. And I think that the combination of that is very hard to shake. And I know that my job is to shake it and to perform. That's why it's performing and not, it wouldn't be a very interesting show if I just came out one day and said, I'm going to sit here in a ball and rock back and forth, and won't you join me for a half hour of sadness? I have to.
People come expect, but that wasn't performance when you were wrestling with the sadness you were feeling with him.
With him. Well, I thought it was relevant to the conversation I was having with him, which was, and the reason that it sort of occurred to me was, I was obviously following the internet headlines all day, and there was this enormous amount of space and coverage to Virginia Tech, as there should have been. And I happened to catch sort of a headline lower down, which was 200 people killed in 4 bomb attacks in Iraq. And I think my focus on what was happening here versus sort of this peripheral vision thing that caught my eye about, oh, right, their lives. I think it was a moment of, I felt guilty.
Guilty?
For not having the empathy for their suffering on a daily basis that I feel sometimes that I should.
Do you ever think that perhaps what I do in reporting documentaries about reality and what you do in poking some fun and putting some humor around the horrors of the world feed into the sense of helplessness that people?
No. I mean, again, I don't know because I don't know how people feel.
No.
And, that's the beauty of TV is they can see us, but we can't see them. I think that if we do anything in a positive sense for the world is provide one little bit of context that's very specifically focused, and hopefully people can add to their entire puzzle that gives them a larger picture of what it is that they see. But I don't think, if anything, I don't think it's a feeling of hopelessness that people feel. I think if they're feeling what we're feeling, it's that this is how we fight back. I can only fight back in the way that I feel like I'm talented. And I feel like the only thing that I can do, and I've been fired from enough jobs that I'm pretty confident in saying this, the only thing that I can do even a little bit better than most people is create that sort of, that context with humor. And that's my way of not being helpless and not being hopeless.
Is Washington a better source for jokes now that the Democrats are in the majority?
It's more fun for us because we're tired of the same deconstructed game.
Yeah, I saw that piece you did the other day on the Democrats debating how to lose the war.
Right, exactly. This has been 6 years, we're worn down. And I look forward to a new game to play and something new. I mean, the only joy I've had in that time is having Steven's show come on the air and sort of give us a different perspective. And, you know, because it's made of kind of the same genetic material as our show, it feels like it's also freshened up our perspective and kind of completed our thought. But
well, you could take me on as a correspondent.
We would love to take you on as a correspondent.
Where would your assignment?
The pay is pretty bad.
Yeah, well, this is PBS. What would my assignment be? Where would you like me to be? Your senior elderly correspondent?
I would like you to just sit in my office, and when I walk in, just lower your head and go, "That was ugly."
I do that when I'm watching. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.